It was one of the deadliest attacks Kyiv had faced in a long time. By the end of it all, at least 24 people were dead, and another 48 had been injured. Once again, Putin had targeted civilians, and this time, Ukraine decided Russia would pay a heavy price for it. After the strike, President Volodymyr Zelensky gave the order to Ukraine's military, prepare a response, and Ukraine didn't waste time. What followed was a wave of retaliation that left parts of Russia burning as massive drone strikes slammed into key targets deep inside Russian territory. The attack on Kyiv itself had been brutal. Overnight into May 14th, explosions thundered across the city as Russia launched a massive aerial assault. Ukraine reported that Russia fired 56 missiles of various types, including Iskander ballistic missiles, Kinzhal aeroballistic missiles, and even S-400 systems that are normally designed for air defense roles. Russia has increasingly been using S-400 missiles in ground attacks because of shortages in its dedicated precision strike weapons. One residential apartment building was completely destroyed during the attack. Among the victims were 3 children. The youngest was just a 12-year-old girl. By the time the assault ended, Ukraine's military counted a staggering 675 drones and 56 missiles involved in the strike. But even that wasn't enough to fully stop the destruction. Some of Russia's missiles and drones broke through the defenses and slammed into residential areas. 11 apartment buildings in Kyiv were hit, while dozens more structures across Ukraine were damaged. Ukraine did what it has repeatedly shown throughout the war. It endured the attack, rescued its civilians, and prepared its answer. By 9 a.m., local time on May 15th, Ukrainian rescue workers had completed search and rescue operations at a residential building near the Dnipro River. Crews had spent hours digging through rubble, desperately searching for survivors. But while rescue teams worked in Kyiv, preparations for retaliation were already underway elsewhere. Ukraine's foreign minister, Andriy Sybiha, pushed for an emergency United Nations Security Council meeting. He wanted the international community to respond to what he described as Russia's killings of civilians and attacks on humanitarian personnel. Diplomatically, it was an important move. But many in Ukraine believe the Kremlin no longer cares about international condemnation. Putin has ignored criticism for years, and for many Ukrainians, statements from the United Nations alone are no longer enough to stop Russia's attack. At the same time, Sybiha appealed to the world. Zelensky was calling for something far more direct. The Ukrainian president demanded that both Ukraine and its allies prepare a serious response. He also pointed to a detail that he clearly wanted Western governments to notice. One of the Kyiv-01 missiles used in the strike on Kyiv had reportedly been manufactured during the second quarter of 2026. That detail carried a message. Zelensky was highlighting that sanctions against Russia still are not doing enough to stop the flow of critical components into the Russian military industry. Despite years of restrictions, Russia continues to build advanced missiles. Ukraine wanted its partners to understand that more pressure was needed. But while diplomatic pressure continues, Ukraine has increasingly relied on another type of pressure altogether, what many Ukrainians now call kinetic sanctions. Zelensky ordered the military to prepare possible formats for our response to Russia's deadly aerial assault, and the response came quickly. On May 15th, reports began emerging that Ukraine had launched a major long-range drone attack deep into Russian territory. But unlike Russia's strikes on Kyiv, Ukraine's retaliation focused primarily on military and industrial infrastructure rather than civilian targets. One of the main regions targeted was Ryazan Oblast. Ryazan sits roughly 450 kilometers from Ukraine's northeastern border and only around 180 kilometers southeast of Moscow. Strategically, it was an ideal target for Ukraine to send a message. It was close enough to Moscow to remind the Kremlin that Ukraine's long-range capabilities can reach deep into Russia. At the same time, it was far enough away to demonstrate the growing range and effectiveness of Ukraine's expanding drone arsenal. And inside Ryazan stood one of Russia's most valuable energy facilities, the Ryazan oil refinery. The refinery is one of the largest in the country. At full capacity, it can process more than 17 million tons of oil annually, producing gasoline, diesel, and other fuels essential to both Russia's economy and its military operations. For Ukraine, the logic was simple. strike the refinery, and you damage a critical part of Russia's war machine while staying consistent with Ukraine's strategy of targeting military and economic infrastructure instead of civilians. So that's exactly what Ukraine did. The Ryazan oil refinery erupted into flames after Ukrainian drones reportedly struck the facility during the early hours of May 15. Images and footage shared online showed enormous fires lighting up the night sky. Massive black smoke clouds rose over the refinery as flames spread across parts of the industrial complex. Independent Telegram channels, including Exilenova Plus, published photographs showing what appeared to be multiple impact points and extensive fire damage. The sky above Ryazan turned dark with smoke while orange flames burned through the night. As more reports emerged from civilians on the ground, the scale of the strike became clearer. Ukraine Today reported that explosions began around 2 a.m. local time. Residents across different parts of the city described hearing dozens of loud blasts over the course of several hours. Russian officials later tried to claim that Ukraine had attacked more than just industrial targets. According to Russian authorities, residential buildings were also damaged during the attack, but questions quickly emerged about what had actually caused that damage. Meanwhile, explosions reportedly continued at the refinery until around 5 a.m. Some analysts suggested Ukraine may have continued sending drones into the area, while others believed secondary explosions from fuel fires were causing much of the continuing destruction. Videos shared online captured the unmistakable sound of drones flying overhead, while Russian air defenses attempted to intercept them. In one clip, anti-aircraft fire can be seen streaking into the sky, but the defenses appeared unable to stop at least some of the incoming drones, and several of those drones clearly reached their targets. After the attack, Ryazan's regional governor, Pavlo Malkova, claimed that drone debris had struck an unspecified enterprise in the region, but satellite images, videos, and eyewitness footage made it obvious which facility had actually been hit. The Ryazan oil refinery was burning. Then came another claim from Russian officials, one that dramatically changed the narrative Russia was trying to present. Malkova stated that 3 civilians had been killed and another 12 injured during the attack. He also claimed that residential buildings had been damaged, suggesting Ukraine was carrying out strikes against civilians just like Russia had done in Kyiv. Russian state media quickly amplified the accusation. Videos circulated online showing apartment buildings damaged by explosions and fires. At first glance, the footage appeared shocking, but one particular video told a very different story. In the footage, what appears to be a Russian Pantsir air defense system can be seen firing. Seconds later, a massive explosion erupts near a residential building, tearing into the structure and sending debris flying. The implication was hard to ignore. Rather than Ukrainian drones directly hitting the building, the damage may have been caused by Russia's own air defenses malfunctioning or missing their targets. That single clip immediately raised major questions. Was the Pantsir system simply inaccurate? Did Russian air defenses accidentally strike civilian structures while trying to intercept drones? Or was Russia attempting to create a narrative that Ukraine had intentionally targeted civilians? There are no clear answers yet, but the footage undeniably showed one thing: Russian weapons were hitting Russian buildings. Meanwhile, the Ryazan refinery continued burning, and for Ukraine, the strike represented something larger than just another drone attack. According to Hananot, director of the Eurasia Non-Proliferation Program at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies, Ukraine has now gained an ability to inflict pain on Russia in a way they couldn't previously. Not added another warning for Moscow. That ability isn't going away, and she may be right. Ukraine has attacked the Ryazan refinery before. In fact, previous strikes had already damaged the facility multiple times throughout 2025. One earlier attack reportedly forced operations to halt completely for a period of time. So why did this strike feel different? The answer appears to be both power and scale. Ukraine's drone campaign has evolved rapidly. What once consisted of isolated attacks has now transformed into coordinated large-scale operations targeting multiple Russian regions simultaneously. While Ryazan burned, Ukrainian drones were also reportedly heading toward Moscow. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin claimed Russian air defenses intercepted 5 drones approaching the capital. Elsewhere, Russian defenses were less successful. In the city of Yeysk, Ukrainian strikes reportedly destroyed a Beriev B-200 aircraft and a K-27 helicopter. The destruction destruction of the Beriev aircraft was especially notable because Russia uses the plane for firefighting operations. Some analysts suggested Ukraine may have deliberately targeted firefighting assets ahead of future attacks on industrial infrastructure. Ukraine also continued operations in occupied territories. In Luhansk, Ukrainian forces reportedly destroyed a Tor M2 air defense system. In Crimea, another Panzer S-1 system was reportedly taken out. Those strikes matter because every destroyed air defense system potentially opens new aerial corridors for future Ukrainian attacks. Later, Zelensky described the strikes as a justified response to Russia's assault on Kyiv. He also revealed additional targets Ukraine claimed to have hit, including a Redut 2 U.S. communications system and a cargo ship reportedly carrying ammunition for Russian forces. According to Ukrainian reports, some drones traveled as far as 1,000 kilometers into Russian territory during the May 15th operation, and that's the real problem for the Kremlin. Ryazan wasn't the only target. It was just one part of a much broader campaign showing that Ukraine can now launch large-scale drone swarms across multiple regions at once. In March, Ukraine reportedly even surpassed Russia in drone deployment numbers, launching hundreds more drones during that month alone. But it's not just the quantity that worries Moscow. It's also the growing power of Ukraine's drones. Ukraine is now reportedly producing around 200 long-range drones every single day, and these drones vary widely in size, range, and destructive capability. Some carry relatively small warheads but can travel enormous distances. Others are far more destructive. Among them is the Flamingo drone missile hybrid, reportedly capable of carrying warheads weighing up to around 1,100 kilograms. Ukraine also fields systems like the FP-1, which can reportedly travel over 1,000 kilometers while carrying a 105-kilogram payload. Then there's the FP-2, a shorter-range platform designed for strikes in occupied territories, carrying up to 158 kilograms of explosive. When increased range, higher production, and heavier warheads are combined, the result is exactly what Russia saw in Ryazan: large-scale destruction, and Ukraine's capabilities may still be growing. Just days before the Ryazan strike, Ukraine announced a new partnership with Germany focused on jointly producing long-range drones. According to reports, some of these future systems could eventually achieve ranges of up to 1,500 kilometers. If that happens, even more regions inside Russia could become vulnerable. Looking ahead, the strikes revealed two major realities about the war. First, they continue to highlight the difference between Russian and Ukrainian long-range strike strategies. Russia repeatedly targets civilian areas across Ukraine. According to the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, at least 15,578 Ukrainian civilians had been killed and over 43,000 injured by March 31st, though the true numbers may be even higher. Ukraine, by contrast, continues focusing primarily on energy infrastructure, industrial facilities, military systems, logistics hubs, and oil production. Civilian casualties still occur during Ukrainian strikes, but Ukraine maintains that its objective is weakening Russia's military capabilities rather than terrorizing civilians. And Ukraine understands something important. The Kremlin will attempt to portray any strike inside Russia as terrorism. That's why Ukraine continues emphasizing industrial and military targets whenever possible. The second major takeaway is even more significant. Ukraine is not slowing down its campaign against Russia's oil industry. The Ryazan strike came just days after other attacks targeting Russian energy infrastructure. On May 13th, Ukraine's armed forces confirmed successful strikes against the Yaroslavsky oil refinery in Yaroslavl. Another strike reportedly hit the Astrakansky gas processing plant, causing major fires. Ukraine also targeted the port of Taman in Krasnodar Krai, likely attempting to disrupt Russian oil export. These attacks appear to be having a measurable effect. Reuters reported on May 13th that Russian crude oil production had declined by 460,000 barrels per day in April compared to the same period in 2025. Other reports claim Russian oil production has now fallen to its lowest level since 2009. Meanwhile, shipments from Russia's Baltic seaports have reportedly dropped sharply following repeated Ukrainian strikes. For Ukraine, the strategy is clear. If Russia's oil industry weakens, the Kremlin loses one of its most important sources of revenue for funding the war. That's why strikes like the one in Ryazan are likely to continue. As the refinery burned, Ukraine sent a message to Moscow. Attacks on Ukrainian cities will not go unanswered. And with Ukraine's drone technology continuing to improve in both quantity and destructive capability, the fires seen in Ryazan may only be a preview of what comes next. At the same time, Ukraine may soon face another growing challenge. Belarus and its leader, Alexander Lukashenko, have recently made a series of moves that many analysts believe could signal new threats on Ukraine's northern border. And if tensions continue rising there as well, Ukraine could soon find itself preparing for yet another dangerous front in the war.